Come in, come in. Oh, hi, do come in, glad to see you. Look, I'm carrying various copies of my Narnia box set, which is really nice because it has the original Pauline Baines illustrations, just like the ones I had in my childhood. I've been reading one of them in particular, so do come and sit down. I'll explain why. Or why I've got it out and I'm thinking about it now. So, I think almost the very time you came round to, one of the first times anyway, you came round to call on me, I read you, since I said come round for a spell in the library, I read you a bit from The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where Lucy finds a spell for the refreshment of the spirit. And the spell turns out to be not so much a spell as simply a story. And she's always trying to remember that story. And of course, all the Narnia stories themselves are refreshments of the spirit. But they're more than that. I think they stock the mind, as it were, with beautiful, luminous images or episodes which turn out to be very helpful and to aid your thinking or give you a sense of clarity at other moments. And I had an interesting experience of this recently. I was writing a piece for my Church Times column about the tragic loss of a tree called the Sycamore Gap tree, which is quite a famous tree. It's a much loved tree up in Northumberland, up near Hadrian's Wall. And there's a gap, there's a sort of lowering down to the countryside, and there's a dip. And all by itself was this absolutely splendid sycamore tree, over 200 years old. And it became famous particularly because it was in the film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and it was a special moment in the film where you saw this tree, and it is so perfect and unspoiled. And then a few months ago, it was wantonly felled in the middle of the night. I don't think it's yet been proved who did it. It was taken down for no reason and just left lying. It was just a piece of sheer mindless vandalism. And there's a great public outcry. It was extraordinary. People hadn't realised how precious that tree was to so many people. And the question has arisen, what to do with its wood? And it was just that question. Here's a beautiful tree, a significant tree. It's been felled. Suddenly stirred in me a memory of a little kind of addendum at the end of The Magician's Nephew, which asks just such a question. And it provides, as it were, the backstory of the famous wardrobe. So, when I wrote my piece about the Sycamore Gap tree, this suddenly came to mind, and I alluded to it very briefly. But I thought I'd read you the actual passage in the at the end of The Magician's Nephew. And if we got a moment, I'll read you the short article. It's just a little piece. So, we're told that Diggory, the hero of this story, this origin story, grows up to be Professor Kirk and inherits a great big house in the country, which is of course where the line at which the wardrobe begins and where the wardrobe is. So we're told lots of tying up of loose ends. And he says this: the lamppost that the witch had planted without knowing it shone day and night in the Narnian forest, so that place where it grew came to be called Lantern Waste. And when, many years later, another child from our world got into Narnia on a snowy night, she found the light still burning. And that adventure was, in a way, connected with the ones I've just been telling you. It was like this. The tree which sprang from the apple that Diggory planted in the back garden, an apple he'd taken from a magical Narnian tree, lived and grew into a fine tree. Growing in the soil of our world, far out of the sound of Aslan's voice and far from the young air of Narnia, it did not bear apples that would revive a dying woman, as Diggory's mother had been revived, though it did bear apples more beautiful than any others in England, and they were extremely good for you, though not fully magical. But inside itself, in the very sap of it, the tree, so to speak, never forgot the other tree in Narnia to which it belonged. Sometimes it would move mysteriously when there was no wind blowing. I think that when this happened, there were high winds in Narnia, and the English tree quivered, because at that moment the Narnia tree was rocking and swaying in a strong southwestern gale. However that might be, it was proved later that there was still magic in its wood. For when Diggory was quite middle-aged, and he was a famous learned man, a professor, and a great traveller by that time, and the Kettleys' old house belonged to him, there was a great storm all over the south of England which blew the tree down. He couldn't bear to have it simply chopped up for firewood, so he had part of the timber made into a wardrobe, which he put in his big house in the country. And though he himself did not discover the magical properties of the wardrobe, someone else did. And that was the beginning of all the comings and goings between Narnia and our world, which you can read of in the other books, which are very nice tying together by Lewis, because of course he wrote The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe first, and when he wrote that, he didn't know the backstory of either the lamppost or the wardrobe. But he does a kind of beautiful invention. But I think it's highly significant that the connection is a tree, and in fact it's trees linked with trees, because first there's a tree in a paradisal garden, then the fruit of that becomes the tree in Narnia, and then the fruit of that becomes the tree from which the wardrobe is made. The trees are the interconnecting things, because they live longer than we do. They're our sense of connection, and of course trees are hugely important both in our scriptures and also in the Norse legends. You know, there's the ash tree that binds all the different worlds together, that Odin rides on. So I'm not surprised that when this Sycamore Gap tree was felled, there was a deep, almost kind of primal reaction in people. People didn't realise how deeply they felt about trees until they'd lost one. Anyway, this is the Church Times, and this is the piece that I wrote about that Sycamore Gap tree. So, here we go. Poet's Corner. Like so many, I was greatly saddened by the wanton felling of the Sycamore Gap tree, an act which seemed to epitomise so much of the way in which we treat nature. There was something poignant about its name, already including the word gap, for it both bridged a gap and left a dreadful gap. It grew, of course, right at the centre of a natural gap, a dramatic dip in the landscape near Craigloch. That dip gave it a splendid isolation and also an image of connection, of being the median place between the slopes on either side, and framed by those slopes, it seemed also to connect the earth and the sky, its roots deep in one, and its branches silhouetted against the other. It's no wonder that so many felt a sense of connection with it, a sense that it connected for them so many disparate things, from their own personal memories, from promises made or troths plighted beneath its branches, to a deeper intuition that it stood for a rootedness, a connectedness that we're all losing. So its felling was at once a tragedy and a parable of our times. Now the question has arisen what to do with the wood of the tree now it has been felled. I heard on the radio a suggestion that it should be turned into pencils, which would be a dreadful diminution, a trivialisation of all that it was. But in the same item there was a suggestion of making musical instruments from it, and that seemed more fitting to me. In its nearly 2 centuries of life, the tree would already have been making music, in the susurration of wind in its leaves and the creaking of its boughs bending in a storm. Why not let more music sound from its wood? I remembered George Herbert's moving words, addressed to his own lute. Awake, my lute, and struggle for thy part with all thy art. The cross taught all wood to resound his name, who bore the same. And then another thought came to me, for I suddenly recalled another story of something made from the wood of a significant tree after it was felled. Tucked away at the end of The Magician's Nephew is C.S. Lewis's origin story of the famous wardrobe, whose door might sometimes lead into Narnia. The Magician's Nephew, a creation story, describes a wonderful tree in a paradisal garden, from whose seed is planted a second tree in newly created Narnia, which will guard it from evil. And Diggory the hero is allowed to take a fruit from that Narnian tree back into our world, where it heals his mother. Diggory buries the core in the back garden, where it grows into a splendid tree, and the tree never forgot the other tree in Narnia to which it belonged, and would stir mysteriously in our world in still air when there was a high wind blowing through the Narnian tree. It was itself a connection between worlds, as all trees were once held to be by our ancestors. When that tree came down in a storm, Diggory, who has become Professor Kirk, has a wardrobe made from its wood, a wardrobe whose door opens onto deep enchantment. I wonder if one good use of the Sycamore Gap tree might be to make from some of its wood a door. The tree itself was a door into beauty, into enchantment, into connectedness for so many. Who knows into what mysteries a door from its wood might open? Well, it was published a couple of weeks ago. I'll be interested to see if anybody takes me up on the suggestion. Anyway, I'm off to the Isle of Man and then Belfast to do C.S. Lewis conference. Anyway, God bless. Thanks for calling round.